Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we help you get smarter quicker using the wisdom from books.
Yeah, books, they're like
Like little cheat codes for life.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And today's cheat code is all about crapping the code of happy relationships with Attached by Amir, Levine, and Rachel Heller.
Speaking of cheat codes, don't forget to check out the episode description. We've got study notes and a link to the audiobook so you can keep learning even after this deep dive is over.
And while you're down there, hit that like button and share the episode with your friends. Help us spread the knowledge, love,
Because everyone deserves a little relationship wisdom. Right. Okay, so Attached. What's the big idea here? Why should we care about this book?
Well, the book basically says that understanding your attachment style and your partners can be like the key to a happier, more fulfilling love life.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's all about figuring out why we do the things we do in relationships. Like, have you ever wondered why some people freak out when their partner doesn't text back right away while others are totally chill?
Oh, yeah. Or why some people are like Velcro, always needing to be close, while others are more like, I need my space.
Exactly. That's where attachment styles come in. Attached argues that a lot of these patterns come from the way we bonded with our parents or caregivers as babies.
Wait, hold on. So how my mom responded to me as a crying infant is affecting my adult relationships. Seriously.
It might sound crazy, but it's backed by tons of research, starting with this guy named John Bowlby. He was like the pioneer of attachment theory.
Okay, so what did Bowlby say?
Well, his research basically showed that infants are hardwired to seek out connection for survival. Right? It's not just about food and shelter. It's about emotional security too, feeling safe and loved.
Makes sense. I mean, babies are completely dependent on adults.
Yeah.
But how does this translate to grown-up relationships?
Well, that need for a secure base, that feeling of safety and connection, it doesn't just disappear when we grow up. It becomes part of how we approach relationships, romantic ones especially.
So it's like these early childhood experiences create a blueprint for how we relate to others, even as adults.
Yeah, like a template. Attached calls them internal working models, and they shape our expectations, behaviors, and reactions in relationships.
So some of us are walking around with these invisible blueprints from childhood that are influencing how we date, fall in love, and even argue.
That's the idea. And depending on what those early experiences were like, we develop different attachment styles. Attached focuses on three main ones: secure, anxious, and avoidant.
Okay, so those are the three main attachment styles. Let's break those down. Who are the securely attached folks? What makes them so, secure?
So securely attached people, they're generally comfortable with intimacy. They can communicate their needs directly. They don't play games, and they're not afraid of commitment. They trust their partners, feel safe being vulnerable, and they don't constantly second-guess everything in the relationship.
Sounds pretty ideal, to be honest. But is it realistic to expect everyone to be that secure? I mean, what about the rest of us who struggle with anxiety or need space sometimes? Are we doomed?
Yeah, no, not doomed at all. And the book acknowledges that secure attachment isn't some magical state of perfection. It's a spectrum, right? And most of us fall somewhere along that spectrum. But even if we're not naturally super secure, understanding these dynamics can help us move towards healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Okay, so there's hope for us anxious and avoidant types.
Yeah.
But before we dive into the more challenging styles, can we talk more about secure attachment for a second? I remember reading about this study about hand-holding and stress, and I thought that was fascinating.
Oh, yeah. That's a great example of just how powerful secure attachment can be, even on a physiological level.
Okay, so tell me about it. What did they do in this study?
Well, they put these women in stressful situations, right? And they measured their brain activity. And guess what? The women who were allowed to hold their partner's hand showed way less activity in the hypothalamus, which is the area of the brain that's associated with stress response.
Wow, so just holding hands with a secure partner actually calmed their nervous system.
Yeah, pretty amazing, huh?
It's like our bodies are literally wired to seek out that sense of safety and support.
Exactly. And it really shows just how important secure attachment can be for our overall well-being. Not just emotional well-being, but our physical health, too.
Okay, so the securely attached folks have figured out the secret to stress management. Just find a hand to hold. But what about the rest of us who might be navigating the world with a slightly different attachment style? Let's talk about anxious attachment next. What are some signs that someone might fall into this category?
So someone with an anxious attachment style, they tend to be super sensitive to any changes in the relationship.
Like always on high alert?
Yeah, they might overthink text messages, constantly need reassurance from their partner, or worry about being abandoned, even if there's no real reason to.
Oh, I know the type.
Yeah,
Always wondering if, their partner still loves them or if they're going to leave.
right, exactly. And it can be really draining for both people in the relationship, actually.
So what causes this anxiety? Is it all about, like, how their parents treated them as kids, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, childhood definitely plays a role, right? If someone's caregivers weren't always there for them or weren't emotionally available, it can create this sense of uncertainty and insecurity that they carry with them into their adult relationships.
So, like, if your parents were kind of unpredictable or didn't give you a lot of affection, you're more likely to be anxious in your romantic relationships.
It's definitely a factor, but the good news is that our attachment styles aren't set in stone. Life experiences, relationship patterns, and even just like conscious effort can influence how we approach intimacy.
So there's hope for us anxious folks. Okay, so that's anxious attachment. Now let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, avoidant attachment. What's going on with these people? Why do they seem so distant?
Well, it's kind of interesting, actually. Avoidant people, they often crave connection just as much as anyone else.
They don't seem like it.
I know, right? But they also have this like deep-seated fear of getting hurt or losing their independence. So they end up pushing people away, building these walls around their hearts.
So it's like a self-protection thing. They're afraid of getting too close, so they keep everyone at arm's length.
Exactly. And they might do things like avoid physical touch, keep secrets, or just shut down emotionally when things start to feel too intense.
Okay, so this actually makes me think about all that classic relationship advice we hear all the time, like, don't be so needy or give them space. That might work for some people, but it seems like it could be really damaging for someone with an anxious attachment style.
You're totally right. Attached actually challenges a lot of those conventional relationship rules. It argues that healthy dependence, like being able to rely on your partner and feel supported, is actually really crucial for a strong relationship.
Okay, that's interesting. So needing your partner isn't a bad thing.
Not according to attached. In fact, they use this really cool analogy about a child exploring a room. Imagine a kid, right? If they feel secure and know that their parent is nearby, they're more likely to venture out and explore on their own.
Because they have that secure base to come back to if they get scared or need comfort.
Exactly. But if the parent's not there, or if they're not very responsive, the kid's more likely to cling to them and be afraid to explore.
So it's like that feeling of security actually allows for more independence.
Yeah, kind of counterintuitive, right? But it makes sense. And attached says the same principle applies to adult relationships. When we feel secure and supported by our partner, we're actually more likely to take risks, pursue our own interests, and grow as individuals.
Which brings us back to that hand-holding study. It's like having that secure connection with your partner actually frees you up to be more independent.
Totally. And it goes against this whole idea that, like, coddling someone makes them overly dependent. Attached argues that it's actually the opposite. Having your needs met consistently, that's what allows you to become more independent and resilient.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So we've got these different attachment styles. How do they play out when people actually start dating? What happens, like, when an anxious person falls for an avoidant person?
That's what Levine and Heller call the classic mismatch. And it can be a really tough dynamic. You've got the anxious person who's craving closeness and reassurance, and then you've got the avoidant person who's instinctively pulling back, creating distance.
It's like that constant push and pull, right? One person leaning in, the other leaning out.
Yeah, exactly. The more the anxious person seeks reassurance, the more the avoidant person withdraws. And the more the avoidant person withdraws, the more anxious the other person gets. It can become this vicious cycle.
That sounds exhausting, honestly. But attached also says that even mismatched couples can make it work, right? It's not like all hope is lost if you find yourself in one of these pairings.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The key is understanding and acceptance. Both partners need to be willing to learn about their own attachment style, and recognize their partner's style, and then work together to create a dynamic that works for both of them.
Okay, so communication is key. But it sounds like it takes a very specific kind of communication to bridge this attachment gap. What does that look like in practice?
It's not just about talking more, it's about talking differently. For the anxious person, it's about learning to express their needs directly without blaming or accusing their partner.
So instead of saying something like, "You never spend time with me," they might say.
They might say, hey, I've been missing you lately. I'd love to spend some quality time together this weekend. Something like that.
Right, so it's about focusing on your own feelings and what you need, rather than attacking your partner. What about for the avoidant person? How can they communicate more effectively in these situations?
For them, it's about recognizing that their partner's need for connection isn't a personal attack. It's not about trying to control them. It's just how they experience love. And it's about finding ways to reassure them without feeling like they're being suffocated.
So it's about respecting those differences, even if you don't totally get them. It's like saying, okay, I see how you operate, and I'm willing to work with that. But what about when conflicts inevitably come up? Even the most securely attached couples are going to disagree sometimes, right? How does attached say we should handle those situations?
So, yeah, disagreements, they're going to happen, right? Even in the best relationships.
Right. It's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about learning how to fight fair.
Exactly. And attached gives some really helpful tips for managing those moments, without things getting out of control. And these tips work no matter what your attachment style is.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the secret to disagreeing without triggering World War III?
Well, one of the big things is to avoid making sweeping generalizations, when you're in the heat of the moment, it's easy to fall into those you always or you never traps.
Oh, yeah, you always leave your dishes in the sink, or you never listen to me.
Exactly. And those kinds of statements, they just make things worse, They put your partner on the defensive and they bring up all this past baggage that's not even relevant to the current situation.
It's like you're just piling on more and more resentment, which makes it impossible to actually resolve the issue at hand.
Right. So attached says it's super important to stick to the specific issue that's causing the conflict in that moment. Instead of saying, you always leave your socks on the floor, you could say, hey, I tripped over your socks this morning, and it kind of made me feel frustrated because we talked about putting dirty clothes in the hamper.
Okay, so less blame, more focus on the specific behavior and how it's affecting you. That makes sense. What else? What other tips does attached have for fighting fair?
Another important thing is to remember that even when you're disagreeing, you're still on the same team, It's not about winning the argument. It's about finding a solution that works for both of you.
It's like your partner's not opponents.
Exactly. And that means being willing to see things from your partner's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Easier said than done sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're feeling really triggered. What about those moments when you just want to scream or shut down completely? Attached talks a lot about communication. But how do you communicate effectively when you're barely holding it together?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's where self-awareness comes in. If you're feeling super overwhelmed, it's totally okay to take a break, Say, hey, I need a few minutes to calm down before we continue this conversation.
So it's like hitting the pause button on the argument so you can regroup and come back with a clearer head.
Exactly. It's about recognizing your own emotional state and taking responsibility for managing it rather than letting it derail the whole conversation.
Okay, so no more storming out of the room or giving the silent treatment. It's about taking a time out, calming down, and then coming back to the discussion when you're ready to actually communicate.
Right. And that goes hand in hand with another really important point that attached makes. And this is a big one, ready? Your partner is not a mind reader.
Oh man, that one hits close to home. I'm so guilty of that.
We all do it sometimes, right? We expect our partners to just magically know what we're thinking or feeling. But the truth is, we have to actually tell them.
So no more passive-aggressive behavior or dropping hints and hoping they'll pick up on them. We got to be direct, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yep. And that's the foundation for real intimacy and connection, being able to be open and honest with each other, even when it's hard.
Wow, this deep dive into attached has been so insightful. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how relationships work.
It's really fascinating stuff, right? And the best part is it gives us so much hope. Attached shows us that even if we didn't have the most perfect childhoods, we can still learn to create amazing relationships.
Yeah, and it all starts with understanding ourselves. Once we know our own attachment patterns, we can make conscious choices about how we approach love and connection.
And remember, relationships aren't about finding the perfect person. It's about finding someone who's compatible with you, someone who's willing to do the work alongside you to build something strong and lasting.
That's such a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought. Attached focuses on romantic relationships, But this stuff actually applies to all kinds of relationships. Our relationships with friends, family members, even colleagues. So pay attention to those dynamics too. You might be surprised by what you learn.
Great point. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those connections strong.